I cannot stop thinking about this show. I loved it so much, and I'm one of the weirdos who didn't get truly hooked until the second season, where the writing problems were so blaring that almost everyone on YouTube is discussing them. But there's one issue I haven't heard anyone else mention, and I believe it was a major factor in costing that second season its emotional gravity. Hey, this is the Sword and the Pen Reflections. It is my casual alternative to that channel. So just to set the record straight, because I had no video disliked quite as much as my last Arcane video, which was my first Arcane video, I loved this show. And I think I just didn't make that very clear in that last video because I was just kind of critiquing the whole time, but that's what I do.
I was a crazed perfectionist who had harangued her to within an inch of her sanity.
As a book editor, I help fix stories, and something happens to me when I come across something that has a lot of potential. I have to fix it. I have to get my headcanon perfect, so that way that's what I carry with me forever, because certain things were done so well, so beautifully. I need this story to be as amazing as it was supposed to be. So in this video, I'm going to talk about a particular writing device used in Arcane and how it can usually be used to benefit a story, but how it could also potentially destroy a reader or a viewer's experience. Then we're going to go through Arcane and all the instances of recontextualization that I could find, and then we'll step back and make a general analysis, which will clearly show a couple major differences between Season 1 and 2. Then I'll cover a few particular issues and how they might have been fixed, but as you watch, I'd love it if you'd give your own thoughts and suggestions in the comments, because this show really deserves to have several options from multiple perspectives put forward, and ideally, the final choice should be those options that best amplify the themes and character journeys. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and before I get into the one thing no one else is mentioning, let's just do a quick overview of what other people are saying what went wrong with the second season. So as I said, other YouTubers are pointing out exactly the sort of things I would have pointed out in a developmental edit for this. There are way too many new characters, new subplots, and things that are being introduced, new ideas that are coming in. It's just too much. You can't keep track of it. Things are happening that sort of skipped steps in the development where you're going, well, wait a minute, okay, I could see this character going there, but it seems like they skipped a few transitional moments that would lead us to that. The second season probably would have benefited from being stretched out into 2 seasons if they wanted to include everything, or if they didn't want to include everything, they should have cut a lot of these subplots. And they definitely should have introduced certain things in Season 1, like the Black Rose stuff, or the fact that Mel is a mage, or Vander is picked up by Singe. Like, these are things that I don't think should have just been thrown in there in Season 2, when they are things that we could have been getting stronger hints of in the first season. Also, the resolution for the Vi and Jinx conflict, it was just too easy. It was such a letdown. So I agree with all of that, and I'm not going to go into it because I think there's enough discussion happening on YouTube about those issues. But there is one that I've heard nobody talk about, and I think it was a major contributor to why people just didn't have any emotional connection to this second season, and that's poor use of recontextualization. Recontextualization is when information is revealed that causes the reader or viewer to think or feel differently about an event or situation they have already experienced in the story. So some examples of this would be Bruce Willis was dead the whole time.
I see dead people.
In graves, in coffins.
Walking around like regular people. They only see what they want to see. They don't know they're dead.
Or Strider was actually Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir to the throne of Gondor.
You are Isildur's heir, not Isildur himself. You are not bound to his fate.
The same blood flows in my veins. The same weakness.
Now, recontextualization happens on a spectrum, from minor recontextualizations to major recontextualizations. A minor recontextualization would be one that fills us in on information we weren't already wondering about, and it doesn't really undo anything important that was already known. It's basically just information that creates more dimension. So some examples of minor recontextualization would be like, Harry's father was a seeker for Gryffindor, and that's where Harry gets his natural talent from.
You never told me your father was a seeker too. I didn't know.
Or, despite the doubts, Neo was actually the one.
The Oracle. She told me.
She told you exactly what you needed to hear. That's all.
Or Luke's father was actually a Jedi, not a navigator for a spice freighter.
There's nothing for me here now. I want to learn the ways of the Force and become a Jedi like my father.
Now, a major recontextualization would fill us in on information we were wondering about, but had no answers for, or information that we thought we knew, but is now made severely inaccurate by the revelation. They can be as big as major twists or solved mysteries. Some examples of major recontextualizations would be like, Harry was one of Voldemort's Horcruxes the whole time.
So when the time comes, the boy must die.
Yes, he must die. Voldemort himself must do it.
Or the world is a simulation and we humans are mere slaves to the robots who are harvesting our body heat to power their robot lifestyles.
You've been living in a dream world, Neo. This is the world as it exists today.
Or Darth Vader is Luke's father.
You told me Vader betrayed and murdered my father.
Your father was seduced by the dark side of the Force. He ceased to be Anakin Skywalker and became Darth Vader.
If used properly, recontextualization can create the thrill of totally subverting expectations or solving a mystery. They can be the very thing that makes a story enjoyable. They also tend to make stories reconsumable because it's an entirely different experience the second time around when you have all the information from the start. If used improperly, however, recontextualizations can completely ruin the experience for the reader or the audience. If there's a bad twist at the end, it can turn even well-executed storytelling up to that point into a waste. Poor recontextualizing can be received as unsatisfying, underwhelming, or worse, unbelievable, breaking immersion, which is never good. It should never be relied upon as something that amplifies the storytelling just because it's there. Recontextualization is risky. By definition, it's a derailment of the audience experience up to the point of revelation. And no matter what the derailment is, it's still a shift. You could be thinking you're reading an epic science fiction alien story, only to be thrown into a ghost story. And ghost stories aren't for everybody. The antagonist you have loved to hate could suddenly become the innocent victim of the guy you were cheering for until then. And these are just examples of when the subject matter being recontextualized is taken into consideration. How recontextualizing is used is just as impactful to its perceived success. For instance, a recontextualization that had no foreshadowing or even just poorly presented foreshadowing, where even on the second pass an audience still would have difficulty noticing the affected content, that can make the revelations feel unearned. How many times have you watched a movie or read a book where the recontextualization is thrown in there so far out of left field that all you can think is that the writer just ran out of ideas and thought, well, this'll make it a unique experience? Or maybe it's not that they ran out of ideas, maybe they just got tired of writing and wanted to end it. Or maybe they just didn't want to go through the work of making sure that the ending they chose fits thematically or was really well foreshadowed. Who knows? This is something that you definitely want to avoid in mysteries, and George R.R. Martin talked about this when he was discussing the end of the Game of Thrones show.
You know, if you've planned your book that the butler did it, and you suddenly change in midstream and it was the chambermaid who did it, then you screw up the whole book because you get this foreshadowing early on and you've got these little clues you planted, now they're dead ends and you have to introduce other clues and you're retconning, it's a mess.
You can also recontextualize to the point that you're doing it frequently and it's difficult to follow what's going on. And this is definitely one that Arcane committed. And we'll just get into that one when we go through all of the instances in Arcane. And another consequence of recontextualizing poorly would be doing it so frequently that your audience loses its attachment to the changes that are happening. So like, let's say that we're going back to the mystery again. You've dropped a bunch of clues that say it definitely is the butler. And you're all like, oh yes, it's definitely the butler. But then suddenly clues start showing up that it's the maid, and like, oh, okay, then it must, oh my gosh, it is the maid. Like, how did I not figure that out? And then you start getting more clues that actually it was the mailman, and you're like, wait, the mailman? Like, wait, what? Okay, I thought it was the maid, and you're like, whatever. And then it's like, oh no, it was the chef. And you're like, you know what? It's probably not gonna be the chef. You just kind of lose your investment in what's going on or any of the changes that are happening because it wasn't the last two things that happened and it wasn't the things before that. You expect that there's going to be another shift, so you just don't care. I think there's also a bit of a numbing effect where you kind of become desensitized to it happening if it happens too frequently. So in the first season of Arcane, there were recontextualizations, multiple, but they were progressive and they weren't such huge leaps that I was completely derailed from the experience. I was on a journey that got progressively more painful, and it was a sweeter and sweeter and sweeter pain all the way to the end. But the second one recontextualized so frequently, and they were such major recontextualizations that I experienced all the negative effects of poor use of recontextualization. I had zero emotion, no attachment to what was going on, and that's when I knew what was going on, because most of the time I completely lost track of who was doing what or why. And after a while, I stopped caring enough to even try to understand what was happening because it was just one thing piling up on top of another to where it's like when you fall so far behind in your homework that you're like, I might as well just flunk. So now we're going to go through the entire series of Arcane, and I'm going to list every instance of recontextualization that I could find and label them as either major or minor. And if you don't want to listen to it, that's fine. Just skip ahead in the timeline to the next chapter. Before we continue, please like, subscribe, and comment, even if it's just with an emoji. It's a free way for you to support the channel, and for me, it might bring in some money from all the commercials they keep putting on my videos. Or if you're feeling super generous, check out my Patreon or Ko-fi. I've got links in the description. Or you can hit the Money Heart Thanks button down below. Now let's get back to it. So, spoilers for Arcane Season 1 and 2, all the instances of recontextualization that I could find. And if I've missed any, please tell me about them in the comments. Season 1. Episode 2. We find out what happened on the other side of the door when Vi and Powder and the gang robbed the Piltover apartment and accidentally caused an explosion. Episode 6. We find out that Sky was also from the Undercity and knew and has been at least curious about Victor since childhood. Episode 6. We find out that in his childhood, Victor met and assisted Dr. Revik, also known as Singed. Although it could seem debatable, this is a major recontextualization. Until this revelation, Singed and Victor were assumed to have no connection. Philosophically, they appeared to be polar opposites. But it's after this reveal that we see not only where Victor's personal revulsion to human experimentation stems from, but it also potentially redefines what his thoughts may have been as he considered the way the Hex Core reacted to his blood. It was far less a question of how this was possible than we assumed, and more a question of should he do this thing that so disgusted him in his past. Episode 7. We find out that the Firelights are Echo and his crew, even though we met the Firelights in Episode 4. This is a major recontextualization because it takes a group of people who have been very active in altering the plot in the present and identifies them as someone who is personally connected to not only the main characters on both sides of the Shimmer trade, Jinx and Vi, but it also tells us that a character we have known in the past is still a major player in the present. Episode 7. Silco helped clean up the air quality of the Undercity with ventilation systems and gas masks, and this is one of the reasons he is the top dog in the Undercity. I labeled that as minor because it's just one of the reasons why he was the leader. We also know that he had a lot of manpower and he was very smart, especially when it came to manipulating people. Episode 8. Even though Mel has been saying from the start of the show that she was banished to Piltover for being weak, her mother says she sent Mel to Piltover to protect their investments. I counted this as major because it undermines our impression of Mel's mother, and when Mel's mother comes into the story, she is a major character. She's not one of the main, but she is a major player in the events that happen. So it alters what we think about her and her relationship with Mel from the mother's perspective. Our original assumption was that she did not respect Mel, but this would indicate that there was respect there. And this is also the first of a series of revelations we get about Ambessa that flip-flop our opinion of her as we go. Episode 9. Savika betrays the Chem Baron, Finn, who was attempting to overthrow Silco. This was a very short-lived recontextualization, but I loved it. I thought it was great because I definitely thought she was going to kill Silco. And it was a character-defining moment for her because it showed that she wasn't just this thug for hire. She actually has some integrity. Loyalty is important to her. And that's not something that we suspected about her before because of how much she complained all the time about the way Silco operated. Episode 9. We find out Ambessa is outpowered by the man that Kino, Mel's brother, wronged, and this is why she wants war in Piltover to happen, so that Jace will develop weapons that she can use in Noxus. This could go either way as major or minor, but I'm saying minor because it's bringing us back to our original assumption about Ambessa, that she's not somebody who is exactly good. Episode 9. Ambessa says she sent Mel away because she didn't like the way Mel seemed disappointed when she, Ambessa, had to do vicious but necessary things to protect her family. And I put this down as major because even though it's essentially doing what the last one did and reconfirming something, because we heard that maybe she did respect Mel, love and respect are completely different things. We'll get more into that. Season 2. Episode 3, we see that Ambessa is the one who helped the insurgents into the vicinity of the memorial for the attack that happened in Episode 1. Major. That's just evil. Episode 3. After we have already seen Caitlin lead the strike force into Zahn in the previous episode, we see what the gray gas is, as well as the ventilation systems that the Kierman family designed. I considered this major because I was so confused about what the gray gas was. I didn't even know that it was part of the strategy for the strike force until the second time that we saw the strike force in action. I went, oh, they're doing this intentionally. I thought it was just there because we'd heard in the previous season that there were poisonous gases everywhere. We just didn't see them very much. Episode 3, we find out Ambessa is not ambitious, but rather she is desperate as her kingdom has basically been taken from her by whomever it is that she's offended. This is, once more, a flip-flop on what our impression of Ambessa is supposed to be, going from good to evil, to good to evil, good, evil, selfish, not selfish. It's just all over the place. Episode 3, Ambessa is accused of stealing something from a magical sect, and they are the ones who killed her son in pursuit of it. This is coinciding with the revelation that there is a magical sect, and so I put this as major because it's all part of that. The people that Ambessa has pissed off are magical, and they're pissed off because they say she stole something from them. Episode 5. We find out that Mel's brother is alive, and he wasn't killed by Ambessa's enemy, but rather captured. Major. Episode 5, we find out that Ambessa fell in love with someone who is now her enemy and that Mel is their daughter. I put this down as major because we did not even know that this was something Ambessa was capable of doing. There was no mention of any suspicion about one of the children's births or about Ambessa going off to some other kingdom, disappearing there for a while, and or anything. We didn't even hear mention of Mel's father before this, and I don't mean her actual father, but the father that she thought was her father. I did not know that he existed, with the exception of a painting where we saw him. Episode 5, we see that the person Mel has been talking to that we thought was her brother is not actually her brother. Her brother really is dead. And I have this as major too because it essentially means that a person who we thought we could trust and was a good guy is not. Episode 5, we see that Singed used to be an academy scientist before he was banished for his questionable experiments. Minor, it's just more of his history. Episode 5, Vi and Jinx find a letter from Vander apologizing to Silco, but Silco never received it. They need not have been enemies. Again, this does not change anything. All it does is create more pain in the moment that it happens, but it doesn't make anything that happened before that more or less painful. Like we didn't see Vander reaching out to Silco going like, wait, I have to tell you something. That would have been a recontextualization I consider more painful, because then it would have been like, oh, we saw him actively trying to tell him this, but he never got to. Episode 5, we find out that the beast creature that Singe created, which we have been seeing since episode 3, is actually Vander. This is major. It means that a major character's death did not happen, or that it's basically less meaningful now because it caused all this horrible stuff to happen in its wake, and then we find out it didn't actually happen. Episode 6, we find out that Caitlin wasn't actually betraying Vi, but was helping her to get to Ambessa so they can get Vander out of the commune and away from Ambessa, who wants him for a weapon. Minor, and I say minor only because I saw it so clearly. It was very obvious. To me, this didn't need to happen the way that it did. We could have just had Vi going, wait, I have an idea, and then cut to Caitlin tossing Vi into Ambessa's tent, and we know that they're playing out this act. Episode 7, we find out that Jace was acting weird after he came out of the Hex Core in episode 5, because he had been transported to an alternate timeline where the apocalypse had happened, where he met the mage from his childhood and made some sort of promise that involved going back to his own timeline and stopping the apocalypse by killing Victor. That was major. We went for a very long time without knowing what the hell he was doing or why. Episode 8, we find out that Mel is a mage, and that's why she and Jace were unharmed in the bombing in the finale for season 1, and that's definitely major. Episode 8, we find out Ambessa actually sent Mel away because she knew Mel would be a badass weapon as a mage. This is also major, because it is a different dimension to her relationship with Mel. Ambessa is actually jealous of Mel, which is the complete opposite of finding her incompetent or loving her so much that she wants to protect her. This is jealousy. Episode 9, Maddie was a bad guy all along. I mean, it's a completely different route for her character, so this is major. Episode 9, in the finale, we find out that the annihilated humanoid Jace found in the alternate timeline was actually himself. That's how he got the Hex Tech hammer. I should have seen that coming. Maybe other people did. It was a total recontextualization for me, because the first time we saw that annihilated man, I didn't pick up on that's Jace. Episode 9, the mage at the end of the other timeline, the same one who gave child Jace the expired rune gemstone thing, thus inspiring him to pursue harnessing magic, was Victor, telling Jace to go back and show him that his belief that melding all minds would be the end of dreams, and by telling Victor this, he would stop the end of the world. That was major, and I loved that. Even though there are lots of issues with doing time loops or alternate timelines like this, going back in time, I still loved it. Okay, breaking all of these down. So, in season 1, there were 9 instances of recontextualization, and 5 of them were considered major. In season 2, however, there were 17 instances of recontextualization. That's almost twice as many as the first season. And 13 of them were major. That's a lot more than we had in the first season. Even if we cut out the more debatable major recontextualizations, like all of the flip-flopping incidences with Ambessa, or maybe the annihilated man being Jace, we still come out with 9. Which is well over twice as many as the first season. It's a huge difference between the first and second season in how information was given to the audience. So yeah, in season 2, there were so many recontextualizations, and they were happening so frequently on so many different timelines that I was struggling to keep track of why people were doing certain things. And sometimes I was just having difficulty keeping track of like, what are they doing? Because I would forget like what the nature is of some magic, or like the Black Rose was like, wait, who are these people again? Am I supposed to know? I spent so much time trying to figure out if I was supposed to know stuff that I was missing things as they were happening in the present. And eventually it just got to the point where I just stopped caring. Like the whole getting so far behind in your homework that you know you'll never catch up. So you just sort of sit back and go, I'll just try to enjoy this for what it is. And again, even just scenes without context were fantastic. I loved them. It's just that within context, they were less awesome, which is the opposite of what should happen. But I guess it just goes to show how great the visuals and the music and the performances and the direction of particular scenes was. Okay, so just a few of my thoughts on some of these recontextualizations that happened in season 2. Let's look at Mbessa. The show writers prioritized keeping the audience guessing if she was good or bad all the way to the end, when they could have shown that from the start, that she's both, and then instead prioritized the difficulty in the choice that Mel would have to make to permanently disable or even kill her own mother to stop her from doing this great evil, despite there obviously being some great good in there too. Instead, there was no build up to Mel having to make this choice. She becomes a mage, she goes and visits her mother and tries to, hey, don't do this invasion. She sees the big army, and then the next scene with her is Mbessa attacking the Hex Gates and Mel having to fight her and kill her. It would have been great to see Mel really struggling with this for the whole season. Not exactly fighting her mother, but pleading with her and pleading with her and pleading with her, and then in the end having no choice but to put an end to her. All right, the whole thing with Maddie being a bad guy all along, or she betrays Caitlin, that did not have to happen at all. As a matter of fact, I think we could have deleted Maddie altogether. I think that she was there to create this potential for tension between Caitlin and Vi, but it never happened. So why, it was like, there could be tension if this becomes an issue, but it never became an issue. We literally had Vi, when she found out about Maddie, go, I don't even care. And it doesn't faze her at all. So the one moment that there was an opportunity for there to be conflict, it wasn't there. It was like, oh no, there might be something bad that happens if it happens, and it never happened. So why have it there? I think that there was also, they weren't sure how to basically stop Caitlin from being successful defending Piltover or defending the Hex Gate. And there's so many ways that they could have done that didn't involve her being betrayed by Maddie. I think that I thought Maddie, at first when I watched this, I thought she was Marcus's daughter, but she's not. That, I think, would have made sense, because then we would see that Maddie has a reason to turn on Caitlin if she sees that Caitlin is siding with the Undercity. She would want the Undercity to fail and want Piltover to be victorious. I'm not really sure how helping Mbessa would make that happen, because it seems like Piltover is in danger too, but maybe she would just be so angry that she just wants to hurt Caitlin for even daring to side with those guys, but whatever. Either way, it was a weak character, and I saw zero evidence on my rewatch of this being something she would do, that she would betray Caitlin to Mbessa. It just didn't make any, unless I missed something. If I missed something, let me know, but I did not see any evidence that this could happen. So it feels like they had Caitlin in this position where they didn't know how to make her lose, and they said, let's just have Maddie betray her. Why? I don't know, just she's a bad guy all of a sudden. Okay. Just cut Maddie. The big recontextualization that I did not like, that it just caused so much disconnect for me from what I was watching, was not understanding why Jace is on this killing spree after coming out of the Hex Core. It was almost 3 episodes, I think. That's a really long time to go without having any idea why your protagonist, one of your main characters, is acting the way that they're acting, and it's so different from how they were before. Now, the big moment that this was creating was him killing Victor. But I don't think that moment would have been made less impactful if we knew why before that. See, what happens is he comes back, he kills Sallow, and then he gets to the commune and he kills Victor. And then after that, we find out that he went to another timeline where the apocalypse happened. And at the very end of it, he realized, oh my gosh, this is because of Hextech. This is because Victor succeeds in what he's doing. So I have to go and kill him. I mean, imagine the buildup of anxiety that the audience would have seeing him getting closer and closer to getting to Victor, knowing he's going to try to kill Victor, and then also expecting that there could be this epic battle because Victor is very powerful now. Maybe he's developed some way to defend himself, but he comes across Victor in this vulnerable moment and he's able to just blast him. That would have been so impactful. And it wasn't, because he shows up, we know he's going to kill him or he's going to try to, but you don't really know why. We are not invested in why it's happening. So we're all sitting there going like, oh my gosh, he needs to do this, but I don't want him to do this. And instead we weren't. We were just going like, why is he doing this? And then he did it. And then we found out why. Yeah, so I completely disagreed with the choice to tell us why he was on this mission to kill Victor after the deed was done. I don't think that was a smart decision, because all it created was a long period of confusion, lasting so long that I sort of lost my interest in figuring out what it was. By the time we finally learned what it was, I was like, well, okay. Sure would have liked to have known that sooner. Anyway, I'm not going to continue because I could go on every single point that I brought up, but then this would be like a 3-hour video, and I don't want to edit a 3-hour video. But I do want to hear if I missed one, if I missed a moment of recontextualization, tell me about it in the comments. Or if you have different thoughts on one of the instances that I brought up, I want to hear, like, how did it affect your experience, and how would you have fixed this if you were in charge of editing this story before it got animated? Anyway, please like, subscribe, and comment. Even if it's just with an emoji, it's a free way for you to support this channel. Or if you're feeling super generous, check out my Patreon, Ko-fi, or hit the money heart thanks button down below. You can become a subscriber, or you can leave me a one-time tip. Anything is appreciated. And until next time, be good to yourself.